Welcome everyone. This is the account bringing you the news update for day 307 of the war in Ukraine. First, I wanted to thank you all for your continued support and all the comments you leave me. I am happy my work is reaching so many people, and once I get home, I will work on improving the report and integrate some of the ideas you left me. So, thank you everyone. And now for the report. Today was a rather quiet day, so we have no major news to go over. There's just one interesting article I want to highlight before the news segment. All the minor updates are grouped into the situation in Ukraine, the occupied territories, and the international development as always. However, first we will take a look at the flashpoints along the front. Kreminna. Russia attacked Chervono-Popivka but was repelled according to the General Staff of Ukraine. Fighting is ongoing around Dibrova and Kreminna. Russia is pulling together huge amounts of reserves and equipment to stop a Ukrainian advance. A video allegedly shows Ukrainian forces operating tanks in the area marked with a cross, but it is unconfirmed for now. Bakhmut. Wagner launched assaults on Bakhmut to regain lost positions, and reports indicate they managed to recapture part in the east, around the area marked with a cross, and in Opytne, where they control about 50% of the settlement again. Before we start with the news segment, I want to point out another interesting article I found. The article by the Ukrainska Pravda is titled, "An Orchestra of Murderers. Who are the Wagner Group mercenaries fighting against Ukraine?" It is an incredibly long but detailed account of the Wagner private military company. The article looks at every step of the making of Wagner, from its beginnings in the shadows to their infamous combat deployments all over the world, to their role in Russia's war against Ukraine, and Russia's tries to create the military Wagner brand, promoting membership of the group, making films about mercenaries, and dedicating songs to them. I highly recommend reading this article. And now for the news, starting with the latest out of Ukraine. Yuri Horovets, Maxim Mikhailov, Taras Karpiuk, and Bohdan Lyahov, 4 Ukrainian soldiers, were killed during a combat mission inside the Russian Federation. The FSB claimed they eliminated 4 Ukrainian soldiers, but photos shared suggested they died in a mine blast. Yesterday, during his nightly address, President Zelenskyy confirmed that 9 million Ukrainians are still without electricity. President Zelenskyy has held another Supreme Commander-in-Chief meeting, this time discussing the situation in Kreminna and Bakhmut and whether Ukrainian forces are provided with the necessary weapons. According to the Washington Post, since the beginning of the war, the armed forces of Ukraine have captured hundreds of Russian tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles. But many of those vehicles are in storage facilities without being repaired, as spare parts are not easy to find. According to the National Bank, Ukraine's GDP will shrink by 1/3 due to the war. This will also affect the growth forecast for 2023. Especially the attacks on the electrical infrastructure increase the risk of financial instability. Russian forces continue to target civilian infrastructure in Kherson with artillery. Today, the maternity ward of a hospital was hit and severely damaged. 2 babies were born here today, but luckily no one was injured. Moving on to the situation in the occupied territories. According to the National Resistance Center, Russia has started to forcibly integrate religious organizations in the occupied territories into Kremlin-controlled churches and mosques. Religion is one of the main channels of the Russian government to spread Russian propaganda and ideology. The National Resistance Center further reports that Russia is planning a so-called evacuation of residents of occupied Enerhodar, Zaporizhia Oblast. In the report, the center stated that the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant should prepare buses which will take residents to Zhankoy in Crimea. In occupied Makiivka, a family of 8, including 4 children, was killed. The youngest was just 1 year old. The so-called Ministry of Internal Affairs of the occupation authorities quickly reported that 3 thieves, who already had a criminal background, have been apprehended. However, based on reports by local residents, Petro Andriushchenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, said the crime was committed by the Russian military and probably Wagner mercenaries. And now for the latest international developments regarding the war. The Institute for the Study of War writes in its latest assessment that the statement by Russian President Vladimir Putin for readiness for negotiations is just a bluff to trick the West. This continues the cycle of the Kremlin's deliberate information campaign that Russia has always tried to negotiate but was left with no other choice, the researchers wrote. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has been outraged by an alleged threat by representatives of the US Department of Defense against Vladimir Putin. While Lavrov did not name any specific representatives, the media suggests it is regarding a Newsweek article published in September, citing military sources as saying that the US is considering a decapitating strike against Russia as a response for the use of nuclear weapons. Hanna Maliar, Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, claimed in an interview that Russia's goal is still to fully occupy Donetsk Oblast by the end of the year. According to her, the Donbas region is seeing the most intense fighting of the war currently. Maliar further stated Bakhmut is Ukraine's eastern fortress, where Russia has amassed the majority of weapons and personnel. The head of the Defense Committee of the Bundestag, Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, disagrees with Chancellor Olaf Scholz's statement that the Russian Federation's economic ties with the West can be restored in the future if the Kremlin abandons its war against Ukraine. According to her, normal relations with Russia will not exist for decades. The political system in the Russian Federation must be completely changed. On December 26th, 8 men aged 20 to 44 came to the police station in Podolsk near Moscow with automatic rifles, saying they wanted to hand over their weapons and surrender. During an investigation, it turned out that they were mobilized soldiers from the Kaliningrad region and, after training, were sent to Luhansk. The weaponizing of energy by the Kremlin continues. President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree that will prohibit the delivery of Russian oil to entities involved with the Russian oil price cap. And now the daily intelligence updates, starting with a report by the UK Ministry of Defence. Over the last 48 hours, fighting has remained focused around the Bakhmut sector of Donetsk Oblast and near Svatove in Luhansk. Russia continues to initiate frequent small-scale assaults in these areas, although little territory has changed hands. To the north, elements of Russia's First Guards tank army were probably amongst the Russian forces recently deployed to Belarus. This formation was likely conducting training before its deployment and is unlikely to have the support units needed to make it combat ready. And finally, the evening report by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy, despite significant losses in manpower, does not stop offensive actions in the Bakhmut and Avdiivka directions. The enemy is trying to improve the tactical position in the Liman direction. In connection with significant losses of personnel, there is an increase in the number of desertions of Russian servicemen and their leaving combat positions in the Luhansk region. In order to maintain control over the situation, the Russian military leadership increased the number of patrols to detain and return deserters to units. And that wraps up another one of our news reports. If you're interested in one of the articles I mentioned, you can find the link to them in the description. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.